Hello and welcome to another episode of Ain't It Scary with Sean and Carrie. I'm the titular Sean.
And I'm the very titular Carrie.
Hello, Carrie.
Hi.
Since the last time you've heard us, we've become married. And we've also, this is the first time we're recording since other people have heard this podcast.
That's true, yeah.
And
we had a deep backlog because we knew the whole wedding thing was going to happen and we didn't want any interruptions. But now it's fresh.
Now it's fresh, and now we've gotten to see a lot of really nice things people have said. So thank you all. And
thanks for listening.
and please stay. We'll do better. We'll do better, I promise.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. We're still doing well, I like to think.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So what are we talking about today, Sean?
Yeah, so today we are talking about Professor George Adamski. Professor Adamski, as he was known by his followers, claimed to be the very first person in the United States history to have been contacted by extraterrestrials, alien beings from another planet.
Yeah, I don't know much about this story. I feel like it's kind of a lesser known little nugget of alien history. And I'm kind of going to be learning right along with the audience, I think. So that's pretty exciting.
He's great because obviously from the very, very late 40s is when kind of the first saucer sightings were reported. And then right through the 50s, there was a craze of, saucer stories and contact stories, and then later abduction stories. And as the stakes get raised, Adamski's fun because he's kind of right there with them the whole way, trying to hang on, trying to stay relevant, and trying to stay in the scene, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So where do we start with Adamski?
Where George Adamski started was in Bromberg, Prussia.
Oh.
Which was at the time part of the German Empire, because he was born April 17th, 1891. And when he was 2 years old, his family moved to Dunkirk, just outside of New York City, and he grew up there very, very poor, dirt poor.
Dunkirk, New York City. Okay.
At age 21, he joined the U.S. Cavalry Regiment and went and fought for 2 years on the Mexican border. This was during the Pancho Villa expedition.
Wow.
We don't have much in the way of knowledge about his service there, just that he served. In 1917, the year after he got back, he got married to a Mary Shimbersky. And after the marriage, they moved west, as Adamski, who was not a very well-educated man, was looking for work. So he did maintenance work in Yellowstone for a little while. He found a job at a flour mill in Oregon, and then he was working at a concrete factory in California, and that's how they kind of spent the next couple of years. Until the 1920s brought a fascination with the occult and with spiritual practices into California.
Well, that's really when spiritualism was getting really big, was the early 1900s into the 20s.
Yeah, exactly. It was very, very cool and trendy to have a seance or whatever. And what was also getting big was theosophy, which, for those of you who don't know, is a weird occult modern religion started by some thinkers in like the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Was Madame Blavatsky one of the big
foremost? Madame Helena P. Blavatsky.
Oh,
who's a fascinating character all on her own.
For sure. But
certainly the country was still feeling the ripple effects of that. And it was very trendy to be in these kind of look, theosophy is all about all life and objects and layers of perception in the universe are all reflections of a single universal absolute that everyone is a part of. And so anything you kind of do bad to other people, you're also doing to yourself kind of things. I think that's a lot of it. It's also
kind of a karma thing.
Yes.
Now, is that universal absolute like God, or is it the Force, or?
I think yes.
Okay.
It's like the universal Godhead, right? But you are also it, and I am it.
It's what connects all of us, I guess.
Yeah, but not even connects, because I think we don't actually exist except as reflections of this thing. Also, human souls do exist as their own things, but they're reincarnated through a system of karma, kind of like Buddhism,
Mm-hmm.
and they can eventually achieve emancipation, like nirvana.
Oh, okay. So they don't get reincarnated again.
No, and there's a lot more, and it's all impenetrable.
Sounds like it.
And that's kind of the point. Occult stuff is often about, and theosophy certainly is all about, this idea of like hidden knowledge, that you can better yourself through ancient wisdom that has been passed down to only a select lucky few. And with theosophy, these lucky few are called ancient masters of wisdom, and Madame Blavatsky herself claimed to have gotten all the things she wrote in her silly books from ancient masters she met in Tibet and later astrally communicated with.
As you do.
As you do. So these are all ideas that really entranced George Adamski.
Okay.
He was into all of this stuff. And he became, in the 1920s, kind of a minor player in this California occult scene. And he was something of a spiritual leader, or a self-styled spiritual leader anyway.
Mm-hmm.
He called his personal variant on all this neo-theosophy stuff Universal Progressive Christianity.
Oh, okay. So he related it back to Jesus and God and all of that.
Yeah, I think Blavatsky might even tie in Christianity in a way by saying that Jesus was one of the ascended masters.
Right. And he was also part of the universal force and
Of course he was.
blah, blah, blah. Okay. Interesting. So is this kind of like a cult or a church, or is this just a teaching of his? Is it a Scientology thing? What is he doing at this point?
He called it the universal law, his teachings. He founded what he called the Royal Order of Tibet in Laguna Beach, very Tony, in the early 1930s. And they had a meeting hall that they called the Temple of Scientific Philosophy.
Oh.
Where Adamski was the chief philosopher.
Of course.
And there he would kind of do a lot of meditating and get psychically channeled wisdom from Tibetan masters that he would pass on to his followers.
And he had followers.
Yes, he did. He had, I think, maybe at its peak, a couple dozen people who would come and listen to him talk and stuff. And also, sort of, I think it was a very touristy scene at the time. So I think there was always a lot of people to hear him talk, even if not all of them stayed and kind of became students.
Okay. Was he making money off this enterprise? Like, what is he doing for work?
Well, it's funny you say that, Carrie. This was in the early 1930s, late 1920s, early 1930s. And interesting timing for Adamski. He got this Royal Order of Tibet going just after Prohibition had been in full swing for a couple of years. And he managed to get a government license to produce wine for religious purposes.
Okay.
Adamski was quoted by friends as saying, "I made enough wine for all of Southern California. I was making a fortune."
I could imagine.
Yeah, so...
especially California. I mean, that's prime wine country and no one's making wine.
Exactly. And so that went very well for George Adamski, and that's, I believe, most of what he was doing for work.
You gotta hustle, man.
Absolutely, and he took a full advantage.
Was he tax exempt?
He was a religious body, so yeah, I think he probably would have been.
Jeez. So he's making wine, he's got no taxes, he's living the life.
He's living the life until 1933, when the 21st Amendment voids the Volstead Act and ends Prohibition. After that, Adamski allegedly told friends that, well, that was when I had to get into all that flying saucer crap.
As you do.
Later in his life, he said that to people.
Well, I figure, people are getting wine elsewhere. They don't need his probably crappy wine anymore. And so he just immediately goes, aliens.
Well, he might have been oversimplifying later, because that flying saucer crap wouldn't come into Adamski's life until a few years later. In 1940, Adamski and his wife and whatever followers he did have moved to Palomar Mountain in California. And they rented some land and started a sort of commune there. And they called it Valley Center. They were just farming, studying philosophy. He's channeling wisdom from Tibetan masters, as you do, as George Adamski does, and just trying to gather some followers and students.
Okay.
By 1944, there's less than a dozen people there.
Oh. Didn't stick, huh?
Didn't stick. And he had also frittered away most of the booze money. Most of that sacramental wine money had gone down the toilet. So things had taken a turn for George Adamski in a short time.
Did he use the money on the farmland and all that stuff? Or
I mean, maybe.
was he just dumb with his money?
It's unclear. What is clear is that he didn't have much of it because in 1944, Alice K. Wells, who was a student of his, who had a lot of money, bought the group 20 acres at the base of Palomar Mountain so they could stop renting, and built Adamski and his wife a house and a roadside hamburger stand that they could run, and a campground called Palomar Gardens that was open to passersby. So there was a new income stream for Adamski and his followers. He got a little hamburger stand, diner on the side of the road, and a campground.
So this is very generous of Alice to do.
Oh, Alice. This man inspired such loyalty and devotion in his followers. At this point, he also has a secretary named Lucy McGinnis and a Man Friday, I don't know, like a male assistant named Carol Honey, who all three of those will be with him from here till the end of this story. And Alice K. Wells in particular won't abandon George Adamski till he dies.
Did she have a thing for him?
It has been suggested George Adamski's sexuality is an interesting area that we'll get into later. Yeah, big question mark. It's been suggested that he was sleeping with Alice as well as many other men and women in his orbit.
So he is kind of an L. Ron Hubbard type.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, he's got all this New Age kind of philosophy. Well, hold on. Let's get to the rest of the story. So they're Palomar Gardens. They call this new campground. And at the campground and the diner, Adamski would many nights just lecture, just wander into the middle of the restaurant or into a campground and lecture on Eastern philosophy and religion and his new wavy kind of his Flock of Seagulls music. No, his new agey kind of Madame Blavatsky stuff. Late into the night for tourists and followers and whoever else happened to be standing around and listening. And people say, we'll hear some from George Adamski later, but people say he was an unpolished speaker, but somehow very, very charismatic. Like, you just wanted to trust this guy.
I guess you'd have to be, in a way. You have to be charismatic somehow.
Now, he also built a wooden observatory shed at this campground to house a 15-inch telescope that he had managed to purchase at some point. You remember, he was super into the stars, right?
Absolutely.
His observatory at the bottom of the mountain was not to be confused with the famous Palomar Observatory, which was at the top of the mountain, which was not associated at all with George Adamski. However, visitors would often assume he was an astronomer associated with the Palomar Observatory, and I read that he would disabuse them of this notion, quote, only when he was pressed to do so.
Yeah, I could imagine him kind of piggybacking off of that, for sure.
Well, and by the way, continue up the mountain and make sure you go and see the main observatory.
This is just the satellite area.
Exactly. And at this point, he is always called by his followers, and therefore by most of the other people who come by the campground, Professor Adamski.
So he wasn't an actual professor.
George Adamski held a third-grade education. His family was very poor, and he had to drop out of school in the 4th grade. And he actually hated writing and dictated everything to a secretary for his whole life.
Okay.
Very insecure about it, apparently. So that was 1944. This continues on in this fashion for a while, but he doesn't have a hook. You know what I mean? Theosophy was a hook, and it was trendy for a little while. And Adamski, George doesn't really have that.
Well, he has that, but it's not his original idea. And also it's so, I mean, from what you even described, it's so vague and like open-ended that it could be anything. I mean, listen, the best cults and religions, they have that little thing about it that makes it, cool or interesting or different.
The most successful offshoot of Theosophy in the U.S. was called the I Am movement, or the I Am activity, or the I Am cult, depending on who you talk to. They're actually still active, but their peak was in 1938 when across the U.S. they had 1 million followers.
Wow.
So this stuff was again incredibly dense and hard to understand, but I think that's why it got people, because there's this, like Scientology, right? This promise of ascending in levels of knowledge to where you'll be able to understand that.
Sure, Theosophy was big in 1938 all over the world, as we know, because a man named Adolf Hitler was a big fan of Blavatsky and all of those ideas.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, so...
It's tough to dip your toe too far into Theosophy, or, frankly, into alien conspiracy theory without just, it always turns into Jews, doesn't it?
Well, okay. The conspiracy theories do. You always reach the point of the anti-Semitic point of no return, in which things just are completely batshit, and you don't want to put any stock into any part of it because some of it is so rooted in like just this nasty racism and things like that. So yeah, it makes it hard to take any of it seriously when so much of it has informed some of the worst ideas and people.
Yeah, it's brutal, and maybe it's just an insight into like who really wants to buy into these ideas and stuff.
People that think they're bigger than life.
Yeah. So the saucers would first come into George Adamski's life in 1946, specifically October 9th. Now, that night there was a meteor shower, and George Adamski and some of his friends were at the campground, and they claimed that they saw a large cigar-shaped, well, what did they see? Maybe we'll have George Adamski tell you himself.
Oh, is he here?
It was something like a dirigible size, but it didn't have a basket underneath it, which was strange. So we let it go at that. But suddenly the thing shot out into outer space, straight up, awfully fast, and left the amber trail behind it.
Left a trail behind it, just like, hear me out, a meteor.
Sure.
But going up, one would assume.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of reminds me of the Goodyear blimp sighting of a few weeks ago, where people thought that was a UFO. Just the way he described it, like with no part on the bottom, where obviously there's like that little, it's just a little, bump, or like the passenger cabin or whatever. But again, it's during a meteor shower, so I don't know how much stock I can put into anything being seen in the sky during a meteor shower. I'm sure there's a lot of weird stuff going on.
I guess you'd think so, yeah. Anyway, he took a photograph of this, what he described as a large cigar-shaped mothership. But he never produced it. I guess he just didn't think anyone would be interested.
Like he eventually produced it, or?
Well, he produced it in early 1947.
Oh.
Right after Kenneth Arnold became the first person to report seeing a UFO.
Well, isn't that a coincidence?
Yeah, Kenneth Arnold was a private pilot who claimed he saw a fleet of crescent-shaped crafts doing coordinated maneuvers over Mount Rainier in Washington.
So Adamski was like, I have this thing. It looks nothing like that, but it reminds me.
Yeah, and I think, I don't want to suggest anything, but he might have been inspired by the fact that Kenneth Arnold's report caused a huge media firestorm. It was picked up by outlets all over the country, and people were very excited / terrified / titillated by these these flying crescent rolls.
I mean, flying crescent rolls sound delicious, so I too would be titillated by that. But since this is 46, 47, like, where do you think this flying saucer popularity came from? Because this is pre-Roswell, right? Do you think it's something to do with, like, the experimental aircraft being developed in World War II and the public being more knowledgeable about that sort of thing? Or was it the atom bomb, threat of nuclear war? Like, what was it that made this popular? Because I feel like, as you said, before this time, people weren't reporting any sightings or anything like that. Probably wasn't as much in popular literature or movies, certainly.
Well, what's great about UFOs is they can kind of be all things to all people.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on what you're afraid of at the time, look, the first UFO sighting, like I said, 1947. So we're right after World War II.
Well, this is the first reported sighting in America, right?
Yes.
I mean,
do you know
people might have
abroad?
seen things before them, but they didn't tell anyone, or it might have been in Canada or England or whatever.
Maybe, yeah, but this is the first one that I know about, 1947. Sure. So it's right after World War II ends. That great threat is kind of in the past, and there's immediately the threat of the Soviet Union, this kind of unknown, nebulous evil waiting on the horizon, right? And I think people in the U.S. were terrified and then also excited by new, changing technology that seemed to be advancing faster and faster every day. That's also scary. Yeah, so it can be utopian if you want it to be, the alien thing. It can be anti-war. It can be anti-communist. It can be pro-communist.
It could have been as simple as, daydreaming or whatever, that this is a flying saucer is better than the possibility that there could be something falling out of the sky and blowing us to kingdom come when it comes to, the threat of the Cold War.
A much more real possibility.
Mm-hmm.
So he publishes his own photograph and immediately starts getting more attention and more customers over at the hot dog stand and the little observatory.
Is it a hot dog and hamburger stand now?
Oh, he's got both.
Oh, excuse me, George.
He's got both. I'm sorry. Should have mentioned.
Wow, he upgraded.
Oh, yeah. No, George, they're doing great now. They're flipping burgers and dogs, and they're thinking about adding a griddle for pancakes.
Wow.
This I'm making up. Maybe he was too busy to griddle pancakes, actually, because George was working on a book.
Oh.
He published his novel, Pioneers of Space, A Trip to the Moon, Mars, and Venus, in 1947.
So more shades of L. Ron Hubbard and his sci-fi writings.
Yes, and this was, of course, actually ghostwritten by Lucy McGinnis, his secretary, because remember, George could barely write.
Yeah, and he would not write.
Yes, refused. So, like everything else, he just said this book to Lucy, who had to write it down. It was very, very hard to find because it was this tiny vanity printing thing until like 2009. This guy, Timothy Green Beckley, bought the rights and made it available as a print-on-demand thing. So if anybody wants to read a, by all accounts, torturously written kind of pseudo-early sci-fi novel, you can find it. Pioneers of Space, A Trip to the Moon, Mars, and Venus.
All right. So is there any precursors in this book to things that he would talk about later, possibly? Boy,
is that interesting, Caroline. All I can tell you is this is a book about a person from the moon who whisks the main character, the Earthling, off into space. He sees the far side of the moon, which is actually covered in cities, believe it or not, trees, rivers, the whole thing. He also sees, as the title implies, Mars and Venus. He meets all the aliens, kind of elder space sage yogis.
Sure.
Ascended ancient masters, if you will, who are a millennium old and who share many pearls of wisdom and bits of knowledge about the human condition and ways that people should live their lives, all of which sound suspiciously similar to George Adamski's universal law things that he was teaching back in the 30s.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's nice that George was so close to the mark as far as the alien...
Another coincidence.
Yeah, or at least he didn't change his philosophy much between then and now. So that's all. We'll come back to Pioneers of Space, but that's all on that for now. In 1949, Adamski is traveling around Southern California and giving UFO lectures for money.
Great. Good for him.
Finally making a buck off this thing. And he's got kind of a stump speech going, a practiced list of points he always gets to. And if you go see him at one of these lectures, say at your local Lions Club, he might come through there. They paid him, a couple $100 to come and talk. He might claim the U.S. government had radar tracked a 700-foot-long spacecraft in 1947 on the far side of the moon.
Where did he get that information?
Oh, he knows all the top people, Carrie. You don't need to worry about that, but he certainly didn't worry about it in his talk. He also said that scientists have established that all planets in the solar system are inhabited, and that people, the general public, will be finding this out pretty soon.
Oh.
And also that photos of Mars taken at the Mount Palomar Observatory prove that Martian canals are artificial and built by an intelligence far greater than any on Earth.
Wow, must be really nice canals.
Right? What's in these? What could they have looked like?
They're just really good canals, Sean.
Yeah, but what even makes a good canal as long as it gets water from one place to another? I think the greatest minds on Earth can figure that out.
Maybe there's such a good kind of canal that we don't even know about.
This whole time, he is continuing to take photographs of UFOs, obviously. It's like his main thing. He loves, George Adamski, taking photographs of UFOs.
And he's seeing these UFOs throughout these several years.
He's very lucky in that they do seem to come by Palomar Gardens quite a bit.
Oh, yes, very lucky indeed.
And he's always ready with his camera, which is convenient.
Sure.
And of course, not all of these pictures. Some of them are pretty blurry. Some of them you could even say look like somebody tossed a lamp into the air.
Well, I mean, the fact that if he is actually taking pictures of the night sky and not, cough, cough, a model, it is kind of impressive that he's getting anything on the picture, because it's hard enough taking a nice picture of the night sky with like your iPhone nowadays. So the fact that he's getting this with like a crappy brownie camera in the 40s is pretty impressive.
Yeah. In May 1950, he snapped a photo of some UFOs flying in formation that he said he had seen depart the moon.
Oh. Which side?
The far side, like they came out of the back of it.
Of course. He's a big fan of that moon's backside.
And over this time, he's also adding some more followers.
Oh.
So he already had Alice K. Wells, his ride or die, right?
Mm-hmm.
Carol Honey, his man about town. And Lucy McGinnis, his girl Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Alice and Lucy joined him on a trip to the desert to meet two married couples. This was Alfred and Betty Bailey, and George Hunt Williamson and his wife Betty Williamson. Lots of Bettys. This was sure the 50s.
Yeah.
So the Williamsons basically reached out to Adamski to find out about a separate UFO thing that had happened near them. And to hear Adamski talk about it, I think he learned about it from them, but then gave his sort of opinions. Yeah, I've heard about that, yeah. And this so impressed Williamson that he and his wife picked up and moved out to, remember, it's just 100 miles away or so, but he moves to Palomar Mountain and says, all right, Adamski, take us out into the desert and let's see some aliens.
Wow, they really wanted to see those aliens.
Yeah, or maybe just saucers, right? And we need to see these saucers.
Jeez. That's kind of fascinating to just pick up your whole life just to maybe see some flying saucers.
Yeah. So on November 20th, 1952, Adamski and friends, there's 6 of them, the Baileys, the Williamsons, Alice, Lucy, along with our friend Adamski.
Is his wife ever along for the ride?
Never.
Really?
They don't seem to have hung out all that much, really. She did live there at Palomar Mountain, but she's not mentioned in any of these stories.
Huh.
And, well, spoiler alert, she'll pass soon in this story. But she is still alive in 1952. But it is commented upon by several of the authors I read. They do talk about how he didn't seem close with his wife. They had no children.
Okay.
I mean, lots of people have no children. But...
Right. But she's also just not involved in, like, his life's work that much, it seems.
Yeah. So he's in the desert with his buds, not his wife.
Not his wife.
The Williamsons and the Baileys have come just to see a flying saucer. So you can imagine he's feeling a little bit of pressure to produce here.
Sure.
They're wandering around, and they're worried that maybe they're not going to see anything at all. Adamski might be feeling like a bit of a fool, even. And then, wouldn't you know it, Lucy spots something in the sky.
Lucy does.
And I'll let Adamski pick up the story from here as to what the group saw next.
So we looked through binoculars and we saw this ship having no wings or appendages of any kind, but it had a red sort of a symbol on the back of it, on the top, an orange looking. So immediately thought, well, this must be one of those ships.
Immediately thought this must be one of those ships.
Sure, why not?
He's very good. So I don't know. Well, what do you think? This sounds like pretty similar to the ship he photographed before, right?
Yeah, so he said there was some sort of symbol on it.
Yeah, there was a red symbol on the back and on the top of it, given that it was in the sky. I don't know how he saw the top of it exactly, unless this
Yeah.
a really big symbol. But yeah, he said on the back and the top there was a red symbol, and so he thought, well, this must be one of those ships.
And they all saw that.
They claimed to, yeah.
Sure. Okay.
As I'll get to, Adamski demanded written statements signed and sworn from all of his new friends about this event. So.
Yeah, I demand written, signed, sworn statements from everyone I meet.
Yeah, you do that for me every single day.
Mm-hmm.
Just when you feed the dog. Oh, yep, you saw it.
Got to make sure everything's, legal, kosher.
Always get your receipts.
Mm-hmm.
So this large submarine-shaped craft is hovering. And then they said they saw a smaller ship come out of it, they thought.
Oh.
And then it sort of went over a hill and disappeared.
Both ships?
The little ship flew over a hill and disappeared, and meanwhile the mother ship seemed to withdraw and go fly back up into the sky.
Go on now, be free.
And Adamski said he had a feeling that the ship was looking for him specifically. Now, by this time, he was claiming those psychic channeled wisdom nuggets that come to him were coming not from ancient Tibetan masters, but from aliens from the planet Venus.
Oh, okay. So how did he make that leap? How does he know they're from Venus?
Oh, I guess, well, not from Venus. He believes his psychic guidance is coming from the men in the spacecrafts and not the Tibetan masters of Madame Blavatsky.
I mean, I guess if you're already believing that you're getting psychic communications from Tibetan masters, believing that you're getting psychic communications from aliens is not much of a jump.
So he left his friends. He said, well, guys, why don't you set up the tripod in case the mothership comes back?
Just left them in the desert.
I got to go into the desert. And he walked alone over the sand dunes. He can't find the ship. When he walks over the hill, he's almost ready to give up. He's walking for a little while. And then he sees a man standing in the desert off in the distance. And the man is next to that same little flying saucer spaceship. And Adamski very hurriedly, he says he's worried the saucer's going to disappear. So he takes a picture of the ship, but in a real hurry. So this is one of the blurrier photos.
So just the ship, he doesn't get the man in the picture?
No, you can't see the man in the picture. Like I said, really quick job on the photo. But the pilot of the craft was beckoning to him.
Come here.
Yeah. Come here.
Ew.
He was, according to Adamski, medium height, which is to say about 5'6". He looked basically like a man. He had suntanned skin, what Adamski described as oriental features, and blonde hair. And he was wearing red shoes.
Ooh, spiffy.
And a one-piece garment that was belted at the waist and tight at the ankles, wrists, and throat.
So just like your standard jumpsuit.
Yeah, sort of your standard alien guy jumpsuit, certainly. Actually, and interestingly, if you look up Klaatu from The Day the Earth Stood Still, this is a description of him.
Interesting. Had that movie come out yet?
The year before.
Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, this pilot gestured for Adamski to approach, and as he got closer, the pilot extended his palms.
High five?
Just like, yeah, kind of a high five.
Very nice.
Yeah, it held up his palms, both hands, palms out. And Adamski reached out and took his hand.
Oh, bro, you got a high five. You can't go in for a handshake when he's high fiving.
Well, he said the alien withdrew his hand.
Yeah, I would too. That's a weird thing to do when someone wants to high five you.
Yeah, like it's up as if in a high five position, the way it's been described.
And he just tries to take his hand.
He comes over the top and tries to shake it.
Weird. You made it weird, George.
So finally he figures out what's going on and he presses his palm against this man. This alien man.
His hand.
And his palm against the palm.
Yeah, when he said presses it against the man, I was wondering what he was pressing against.
And so they get to talking.
Do they just stay like that?
No, they don't.
That would be pretty funny.
The hands do stop eventually. They get to talking, but here's the thing. This person doesn't seem to speak any English.
Mm-hmm.
But what Adamski finds is that this guy seems to be putting images and thoughts into Adamski's head.
Kind of translating.
And if he can focus, he can send images and thoughts back. And where that kind of doesn't work, the two of them are both using some primitive hand gesture kind of...
A lot of handwork in this one.
A lot of space work to just kind of get ideas across. And it sounds like it was pretty difficult, and it made this conversation take a lot longer than it had to. But eventually, Adamski said he wasn't sure how much of it the guy was getting, but he pointed to the ship and tried to ask, "Is this your ship?"
It's very nice.
And the man nodded and took him over to see the ship, but he did give George a warning.
No touchy.
He didn't warn me not to get too close to it. Well, when you get to talking and all excited and don't know what words to bring forth or what thought, because millions of them passing through your mind at a time like that, you forget yourself. And before I knew, I was partially under the flange of the ship. And that's when my arm got caught, pulled up, and slammed back and paralyzed.
Don't touch. And George's like, I gotta touch. I'm gonna touch right now.
He's sort of cute. He seems so bamboozled by the presence of this spaceman.
Yeah, who wouldn't be?
He's so excited. Adamski later wrote that the, quote, presence of this inhabitant of Venus was like the warm embrace of great love and understanding wisdom.
Oh.
So that's what he's feeling this whole time as he's flustered
Nice
and
guy.
Turning around and knocking an oil can off a shelf or whatever it is, whatever earnest activities he's getting into here. So his arm is actually blasted back and paralyzed as he gets too close to this spaceship by, I don't know, the force field or energy field around it.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said Orthon darts in and grabs him and pulls him away from the ship and saves him just in the nick of time, or his whole body would have been destroyed.
Oh.
Don't know how he knows that. I don't think Orthon said that. That might be his imagination running away.
He just gave him the face that was like, eee.
Yeah, exactly. And so Orthon pulls him back, cuts his own thumb in the process, and Adamski said they bleed just like we do.
Oh,
red
that's
blood.
very sweet.
And Orthon he's cool though. He looks at his thumb and he kind of rubs it, and the blood stops. And then he reaches out that same hand to Adamski and touches his arm, and all the pain in his arm goes away.
That's nice.
Yeah, George said as of 8 years later, it would still go numb for a couple minutes, a couple times a year. But other than that, it was okay.
All right. So it's it's an A- on Orthon's healing powers, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how I would describe it. So now, I've already said, I've given you the spoilers, Carrie. I've said the word Venus a couple of times.
Sure.
But George's pressing question is still where this guy's from. He can't ask him in English, and he realizes that even if he thinks the word Venus, this guy doesn't know the word Venus.
Yeah. I mean, he'd probably have his own name for the planet or whatever.
So George points at his watch, and he does a big circle around it, and he goes, number 1 with his finger, and he goes, Mercury. And then he does...
I would not get planets from that.
Then he does another circle around that, and he goes 2 with his fingers, Venus. And then he does another one, 3 with his fingers, Earth. And he points down at his feet, Earth.
And Orthon's like, what the...
Well, apparently, because he had to repeat this process a few times.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
I imagine getting more and more... enthused and irritating as he went along. And, finally, Orthon did get it.
He finally did the same thing, but he stopped at orbit number 2, and he pointed to himself and focused into that orbit, which means Venus. So I said Venus again. I said it about 3 times. So finally he said Venus just as plain as I did. And shortly after that he took off.
Yeah,
he was probably like, yeah, I'll take the watch. Nice watch. Yeah, I'll take it.
He didn't take the watch. He did. Adamski asked him if he could take a photo of this man, who Adamski refers to as Orthon of Venus.
And he somehow got that name out of their sign language psychic talking.
Yeah, he says he knows Orthon's true Venusian name, but other humans aren't allowed to know it. So
that's just for George.
So Orthon is what the rest of us get to call him.
Okay.
But Orthon said he didn't want to be photographed, sorry.
It's kind of like how only people who work with Robert De Niro can call him Bob, and the rest of us have to call him Robert.
Yes, exactly. Very much that. And Orthon, no pictures, peace and love.
Sure.
Just like Ringo Starr.
He's very much like Ringo.
But he does offer to take a photographic plate, unused, undeveloped, from George, which George obliges. And then Orthon then launches into a whole thing about how he's there because the Venusians are very nervous about nuclear tests on the Earth and how that the Earthlings are going to kill themselves, and then the radiation from the tests will leak into space and contaminate the rest of the solar system.
I mean, he's not wrong.
And they want to prevent that from happening. But after that, he gets in his ship and he flies away.
Peace.
Yeah. And that was it. Just then, Adamski's other friends came clambering over the hill.
Oh, interesting. Just then.
Just then. Wouldn't you know it?
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, this is the truest stroke of luck. We can agree he's a pretty lucky man, right?
Sure.
All of these coincidences in George Adamski's life.
So many.
This might be the luckiest moment of all. George Hunt Williamson's wife, Betty Williamson, happened to have some plaster of Paris with her.
Like in her purse?
Yeah, and so they took a quick plaster cast of these footprints that Orthon had left behind in the sand. Because you want casts of these footprints because they were covered in tiny little symbols.
No, I'm still shaken. Why did she have plaster of Paris just on her person?
Well, you never know when you're going to want to make an impression. Come on.
I love making an impression.
Going out to the desert, you got to bring some plaster.
That's okay. Sure.
So they make a plaster impression of these boot prints, and they have strange like hieroglyphs in them.
It's like their version of Adidas carved into the bottom.
Yeah, Adamski claimed these symbols were a message, and when he decoded them much later, he figured
Just do it.
That was it. No, it was another anti-war, message.
Don't do it.
He quickly got written statements from all of his friends who were there today.
Signed and sworn?
Signed and sworn, saying
Good man.
They had seen the whole thing from about 200 yards away.
So they were saying that they also saw Orthon and the baby saucer?
My impression is that everyone except Alice Wells later told other interviewers that they had seen George Adamski walk over a hill, and a while later he came back.
And they saw the footprints at that time too.
Yes.
But the first statements said that they saw everything.
Yep.
Okay. Sure.
Later that same year, now, we've got some outstanding plates, right? Those are gone. Later that same year, Orthon returns. This time, Adamski is able to get a photograph of the scout craft.
And Orthon still is like, no pictures, please.
Yep, Orthon still won't be photographed. But in fact, I don't think he even gets out of the ship this time.
It's just a drive-by.
The ship hovers, and then when it's gone, the photographic plates were lying on the ground.
Oh. Okay.
And when they were developed, they had more of the strange hieroglyphic symbols that had been seen in Orthon's footprints.
Now, how can... This is a ridiculous question, because I probably know the answer. How is George able to translate these? Is it just weird mind pictures he has?
Yeah, of course. He's getting psychic transference from Orthon and the Space Brothers.
What else is Orthon saying? Like, does he accidentally eavesdrop on him, like going to the bathroom or whatever?
Well, we have no idea. If he did, Orthon was very discreet about it.
He sounds very discreet.
Yeah, he won't have his picture taken.
Sure.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, Adamski is booked solid for speaking engagements.
Now he goes to the press with this?
Yeah.
Like, hey, I met this guy.
Mm-hmm. Offers to do interviews and tries to get himself signed up for lectures. Again, booked solid for speaking engagements. And he always assures his audiences that his, quote, Material has all been cleared with the FBI and Air Force intelligence.
Is that how he sounds?
No, it's not nearly that much of an accent, but I can't do a slight Polish accent.
No, it's either 0% or 100%.
Yeah, really all or nothing for me, so I'm sorry.
And does the FBI ever comment on this?
Ooh, interesting. The FBI actually sent 3 agents to talk to George about this.
Oh.
They brought along a paper they made him sign saying he understood, quote, the implication of making false claims and that the Bureau doesn't endorse claims of individuals under any circumstances.
Oh.
Yeah. So then a few months later, he was doing an interview and he pulled out that same letter as proof that he had been, quote, cleared by the FBI and as also kind of a winking implication that he was working closely with them still.
Well, he did meet some of them.
Yeah, some more agents came back and took the letter away from him.
It's like, okay, no, enough of that.
They said there would be legal action if he kept claiming there was government support for his stories.
Okay.
Or as Adamski said, they want me to keep quiet.
It's probably more like they want me to keep quiet. So this is kind of like a real life Men in Black situation.
Yeah, and one of those Men in Black was Edward J. Ruppelt, who was the Air Force officer who was in charge of Project Blue Book at the time. For our listeners who don't know, Project Blue Book was the U.S. government's effort to investigate and some would say suppress claims of UFO sightings and things like that.
Bit of the X-Files type of inspiration there.
That's right. And they had already gotten their start in 1953. And so as this media buzz was building around Adamski, they sent, I guess he sent himself. He was the boss. Ruppelt went to the restaurant to, just see what was going on out there. And he was just in plain clothes, just a customer in the place. And he...
the hamburger stand restaurant?
Yes.
Ooh.
And he said this. The 4-stool restaurant with a few tables where Adamski worked as a handyman was crowded when I arrived, and he was circulating around serving beer and picking up empty bottles. There was no doubt as to who he was because his fame had spread to the dozen almost reverently spoken queries. Are you Adamski? He modestly nodded his head. Small questions about the flying saucer photos for sale from convenient racks led to more questions, and before long the good professor had taken a position in the middle of the room and was off and running. In slightly broken English, he told of how he was the son of poor Polish immigrants with hardly any formal education. To look at the man and to listen to his story, you had an immediate urge to believe him. Maybe it was his appearance. He was dressed in well-worn but neat overalls. He had slightly graying hair and the most honest pair of eyes I've ever seen. Or maybe it was the way he told his story. He spoke softly and naively, almost pathetically, giving the impression that most people think I'm crazy, but honestly, I'm not.
That was some great character work there, Sean.
Ruppelt compared him to P.T. Barnum, a natural-born liar and showman.
We also kind of gave this weird backhanded compliment of he said he was little educated, and gosh, I believed him. Couldn't help but believe that he did not have an education.
But that was kind of his folksy charm, And it attracted a lot of attention, including from this guy named Desmond Leslie, who was, first of all, a second cousin of Winston Churchill. Second or third?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. British political families are messy.
Yeah, and royal families at that.
So he had some family money, but not a lot of it, and not a lot of success either. And prior to this, Desmond Leslie had written and directed a movie all by himself, called "The Stranger at My Door." That movie was, it's difficult to find now. It's difficult to say that it was a flop, but I will say that budget constraints became such that he seems to have become an electronic music composer just to do the score himself because he had no other option.
Oh, and this is in the 50s?
Yeah, so he actually became something of a pioneer and ended up inventing, during this process, the first multi-track mixer.
Good for Desmond. Thank you, Desmond.
Good for Desmond. His house is actually a pretty popular like an almost reverently visited sort of destination for guys from, you know, Keith Richards and shit, like visit it and going, oh my God, it's the fucking first thing.
It's the first thing.
It's the first fucking thing. So, Desmond Leslie's film career wasn't getting off to a great start, and he needed a hit. He needed a payday. And so he had already written a manuscript about aliens visiting Earth throughout history that he had based on The Story of Atlantis and the Lost Lemuria by William Scott Elliott. This is actually a very famous and important theosophy text.
Mm-hmm. All comes full circle.
Yeah, exactly. So it purports to lay out the foundational root races that all humanity, descended from. It's like J.R.R. Tolkien.
Sure.
And so he was basically taking those, Leslie was basically taking those same ideas and just translating that shit right into space.
Yeah, okay.
And he thought George might be able to contribute because of his connections to theosophy and because of the kinds of philosophy that he seemed to be putting into his aliens' mouths.
Mm-hmm.
And so Adamski's super into that. He sent a written account of his meeting with Orthon and a bunch of the saucer photos. And Leslie smashed that up with his manuscript that he'd already written and made that into Flying Saucers Have Landed, which came out in 1953. This is still considered by some to be like a foundational text of both the New Age movement and the alien movement.
Nonfiction.
Yes. This is his first nonfiction novel.
Okay.
And this book made a big splash. It became a bestseller.
Oh.
And it made both men famous overnight. And it introduced a lot of ideas about UFOs that people still kind of bandy about. So in Flying Saucers Have Landed, both Leslie and Adamski make the argument that Nordic aliens, this is what they'll be called, not by Adamski and Leslie, but later, because all of this becomes part of the mythology of alien conspiracy theorists. These flying saucer crafts that he describes, these cigar-shaped crafts that he describes, these the clothes that Orthon wears, and the long blonde hair especially. These blonde, handsome, human-looking aliens will become called Nordics and will be one of the kind of more prominent, famous things, that are talked about over and over again by these alien conspiracy people.
No, I can't help but draw the parallel to Aryan people.
Yep. Aryan, by the way,
have a lot of the same features.
I think Aryans are also one of the root races, the Blavatsky root races too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so eventually, mixing this more in with theosophy, other people, not George Adamski, will come to think that all of humanity is descended from the Nordic aliens, and that we were like certain, quote, undesirable races are the result of that blood being diluted and polluted with other alien races. Yeah,
so we're getting closer to that racism, anti-Semitic point of no return.
Look, all Adamski's saying is that beautiful, blonde, six-packed aliens from Venus and other nearby planets routinely visit the Earth. They're really worried that nuclear bomb tests in the Earth's atmosphere will kill us and then them.
Okay.
I should mention that this book came right after the first test of a thermonuclear warhead by the United States, obviously.
Sure.
We do it biggest and we do it best.
Well, we do it.
The book also said these aliens worship a creator of all, and that it's related to the same thing that we on Earth, most of us seem to worship. But
God.
Yeah, but that we on Earth know very little about this creator, and our understanding of him is, quote, shallow.
So because they're an elevated race, they know more about, quote unquote, God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly right. So that's George Adamski, and in 1953, he was on top of the world because of all this. He was on top of the growing UFO community, hottest thing in town. And then some other people started writing books that said that they had met aliens as well. Of course, there's going to be copycats, right? But then some of these folks started saying they had gotten to take rides in spaceships. And all of a sudden, some of the shine came off George Adamski because he'd only talked to the guy.
Yeah, he wasn't even allowed close to it. It hurt his arm.
It hurt his arm when he tried to get close to it. I mean, what's a guy to do?
You got to call up Orthon and be like, yo, Take me for a ride in your whip, man.
Would you like to ride in my beautiful spaceship?
Is that a song?
Riding my beautiful balloon. It might be something only Strongbad sang at a time. So anyway, it was clear. What was clear was that George needed to catch a ride on a fucking spaceship.
You had to amp it up.
And that's where we'll leave him until we come back from this break. Welcome back. When last we left George Adamski, he had been on the top of the UFO world for a couple of years, but he was starting to lose some of his shine because other folks were taking rides with aliens, and, well, George was only talking to him. But all that was about to change, because in 1955, he released his follow-up to Flying Saucers Have Landed, Inside the Spaceships.
Oh, so they've landed. Now we go inside.
Is
this just under his name, or is Desmond Leslie involved in this one too?
No, this one's just Adamski. There is some question over whether he stole some work from Desmond Leslie in the process. In this book, Adamski recounts his trip aboard a flying saucer, organized for him by his old friend Orthon of Venus. And,
So Orthon's like, you know what? I know at first you couldn't even get close to one of these guys. Now we're making it nice. You can get on it and you can ride around. It's going to be great.
Well, it was very painful for him to ride around in it, actually, because the spaceship, his body didn't have time to attune to the spaceship because it was a very brief voyage. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Oh.
Because remember, this is almost 2 years later, and it's the first time Adamski's seen his old friend, Orthon. So let's get into their reunion. I think this is pretty heartwarming.
There he was standing, smiling, and he spoke to me for the first time in English. And I got hurt a little bit because I said, here I wasted all this time on the first contact trying to convey my ideas to you and you to me. Why in the world did you speak English then?
He's mad at him. I don't know. How would you feel? It's like he feels like a real.
I would feel like, oh, this guy just in the last 2 years learned a whole language so we can chat. Pretty nice.
But what Adamski sees is Orthon has been speaking English the whole time. He just let him fuck around last time.
It sounds like an assumption on George's part.
Well, this is what Orthon said.
He said, now look, there is no telephone system between us and your planet. So the only way if I wanted to meet you again would be by an impression. I could impress you well enough. Then you'd follow that impression, which you did in this case.
So look, dude, I had to test you. I had to see if you were psychic enough to get my psychic messages, man.
Mm-hmm.
That was all.
Okay.
And so George grudgingly says, all right, I'll buy that. And he gets on the spaceship. Interestingly, the inside of the small scout saucer, the one from that famous photograph earlier, interestingly, the inside of it looks exactly the same as the spaceship that the main character rode in his novel, Pioneers of Space.
Mm-hmm.
So the description of the interior of the ship is exactly the same as it was in that book.
I am completely surprised.
He is then taken to see the far side of the moon, which you'll be surprised to learn is covered in cities and trees.
I will not be surprised to learn it because we talked about that in the novel earlier.
And has rivers. And then he meets the 1,000-year-old elder philosopher of these space people, who's called the Master. And they talk shop for a little while, and the Master teaches Adamski all of the hidden secrets of the universe, but makes him promise to only share some of them with the folks back on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And then they tell him that he's been chosen by these Nordic aliens to bring their message of peace to Earth. But he wasn't the first messenger that they've had other ones throughout the years. Like Jesus Christ.
So he's another coming of Jesus in a way.
He's not going to say that, but if Orthon wants to say that, or the Master wants to say that,
I'm not going to tell him no. I'm not going to tell him he's wrong.
Yeah, So that's inside the spaceships, and this really helps his reputation kind of kick back up to where it was before.
Sure, riding around in the spaceship is the new trend. You got to hop on that bandwagon.
Absolutely. So, as you seem to have noticed, Carrie, there are some similarities to the plot of Pioneers of Space here.
Just some.
Including the inside of the scout ship, the descriptions of Venus and the moon, and even the meeting with the Master. And a lot of the sentiments seem to be cribbed directly from the earlier novel and from Adamski's earlier writings. And again, it's pretty convenient that the aliens' philosophies just line up so exactly with his.
Just like Scientology.
Yeah. So look, let's get it. What was that philosophy? What did these aliens believe? Well, here's what Adamski said. He said they lived by one law in their society.
The golden rule?
That the planet belongs to the Creator and not to man. That man is only given a right to live upon it as a child of the Creator. And therefore, all children of the same family should share life. And that's why they are living that way.
So that's the alien society.
Pretty close to Christianity.
Yeah, sort of like if you were to have a commune in the desert in California at the bottom of a mountain, and you all kind of just farmed and did Eastern philosophy all day. It's kind of that kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, sort of.
Something like that. So yeah, around this time, other people are continuing to jump on board the phenomenon, including people who claim contact not just with aliens. The little gray aliens are becoming popular around this time, as well as the tall gray aliens, as well as, but a lot of people claim contact with Nordic tall humanoid, blonde, handsome men. Just like Orthon.
Sure, I'm sure a lot of people claim contact with those guys.
These aliens collectively, by Adamski and his followers and these other people he writes back and forth with, become known as the Space Brothers. And the contactee movement spreads through books and lectures, and eventually conventions start meeting, little convention halls out in the desert where people meet to share their stories. And
why do they have to be in the desert? Is it just because there's less light pollution? Like, what's it with the desert?
Well, the biggest ones are usually near places that are known for UFO sightings, and so they tend to be in the desert. You got Roswell. There's probably, maybe you go up to Washington, there'd be, but you're talking about more remote areas.
Mm-hmm. Where people are just naturally seeing the sky better. That's right. Interesting.
And where they have less to do besides drugs.
Hey now.
So in 1957, that was 55, and Adamski stars back on top. But there are many in the UFO community even who don't really care for him. It seems that science is maybe starting to show things that, like, for example, Venus is very probably not able to sustain human life because it's really hot there and there's no air. And how, maybe Mars probably can't sustain human life because there's no air there. And the moon definitely can't sustain human life because it's very cold and there's no air.
Yeah, human life. Orthon is not human. He's beyond human.
Yeah, that's a great point. But it seemed to cast doubt on Adamski's vision of human-like aliens living on every planet in the solar system and going back and forth to Earth frequently. So it's just a lot of the other contactee movement people and those who claimed to be abductees and just paranormal UFO researchers, which was a burgeoning field. A lot of these people cast doubt on his claims. And in 1957, Adamski thought he could maybe shut those people up when he received a letter signed R.E. Straight. Yeah, signed Orthon. No, he'd received plenty of those. They just all came to this mailbox up here. Mm-hmm. So he receives a letter allegedly from an R.E. Straith with the, quote, Cultural Exchange Committee of the U.S. State Department. And this letter tells Adamski that the government knows about his contact of 1952, and highly placed officials plan to publicly corroborate it. Adamski fucking loves this. And he's showing it around. He has it put up in the restaurant, except when he brings it for his speaking engagements. And
he's only got one copy.
Anyway, it turns out this was a hoax. A ufologist named James Moseley revealed in 1985 that it was all a joke he and a friend had pulled.
Oh, so George thought it was real, though?
Maybe.
Maybe?
Moseley says that the FBI investigated at the time, but didn't end up pressing any charges. But the FBI definitely informed Adamski it was a fake, and could he please stop showing it?
Well, at that point, you can't go back.
And he continued.
Yeah.
So I don't know. As more people started poking holes in his story, he just needed any claim to legitimacy he could get.
Mm-hmm.
George, in 1959, the Dutch UFO Society arranged a meeting between him and Queen Juliana of the Netherlands.
Oh.
Adamski promptly ran out to a British newspaper and told them about it. And as soon as they printed an item laughing about this, the Queen's cabinet and advisors begged her to take back the invitation. But she still met with Adamski. She said, a hostess cannot slam the door in the face of her guests.
Well, that's nice.
Nice lady, Juliana. Yeah. The head of the Dutch Aeronautical Association was at that meeting, and he said the Queen had showed an extraordinary interest in the whole subject. Whereas the chief of staff of their Air Force said, that man's a pathological case.
Wow.
Why not both?
Yes.
Also in 1959, Soviet probe Luna 3 took the first photos ever of the moon's far side.
And were there rivers and cities and all that stuff?
Well, Adamski noted that obviously these photos had been doctored to hide all the cities, trees, and rivers. And he said that it was obviously the work of, and this is, again, lucky timing, because the Space Brothers had been beaming him information about this. There was a silence group, all capitals, working against the revelation of the Space Brothers on Earth.
Were the silence group other aliens?
Oh, no, these are obviously powerful world bankers, and they stand to lose a lot if the Space Brothers share their secrets of free energy, and then we move into a scarcity-free economy.
Bankers.
Yes, bankers. And oil tycoons.
Okay.
Yeah, the silence group.
Classic silence group.
This seems to have been the first time this came up publicly, but it was what Adamski was reassuring his followers with any time criticisms came up against him.
Basically, his version of the New World Order.
Yes, very much so. And in both cases, when you get to the bottom of it, it turns out they're talking maybe about Jews.
Yeah, it's not great, Sean.
It's not ideal. As of 1960, Ruppelt, the Blue Book guy we quoted earlier, reported that Adamski seemed to be doing fine. This is another quote from him. The hamburger stand is boarded up, and he lives in a big ranch house. He vacations in Mexico and has his own clerical staff. He also reported that 2 beautiful space women have now entered Adamski's life, an incredibly lovely blonde named Kalna, and the equally beautiful Ilmuth.
Ilmuth?
Yeah. And the equally beautiful Ilmuth.
Sounds like a small town in Ohio.
Yeah, these were, I guess, just women brought into the country from Soviet states to just live with Adamski. None of his followers ever saw where they slept, so you can draw your conclusions.
Okay. Yikes.
In 1961, he had to get another book out there. It had been a couple of years, and his star was starting to fall again, despite the couple of Eastern European girlfriends.
So what, is he piloting the flying saucer now?
Well, we had flying saucers have landed. We had Inside the Spaceships. In 1961, he publishes Flying Saucers Farewell.
Oh, the end of the trilogy.
The end of the trilogy, that's right. And in this one, he mostly outlines the conspiracy of the Silence Group. He outlines the conspiracy of the Silence Group, who he speculates are based in mostly Germany and Switzerland, because that, he keenly notices, is where all the banks are headquartered. And he also explains how and why the Space Brothers have been living among us for centuries and dispels some important myths. it was becoming kind of trendy at this point to suggest that maybe aliens were an extra-dimensional presence or a psychic presence rather than a physical one, or rather than one coming from just a planets in our solar system. He said, that's nonsense. These are physical. These are fucking aliens. So don't come at me with that, because I think to him that was probably too close to a suggestion that it was in his head.
Yeah.
And he also just outlined numerous, dozens or hundreds of times that he's met space brothers, just on Earth, in various bars and restaurants around California. And indeed, his aides said they often saw Adamski when they were, doing speaking engagements or whatever. He'd stay in hotels, right? Mm-hmm. He would have aides kind of stationed outside his door sometimes, or staying in adjacent rooms. And sure enough, they would see, young, handsome, blonde men coming back with Adamski from a restaurant or a bar, or just showing up at the room. And Adamski would say, "Oh, these are space brothers," and then they would leave a while later.
Well, either it's Ilmuth's cousins, or he's got a type.
Sometimes they were older men too.
Hey, you gotta switch it up sometimes. You got a little Ilmuth over here. You got a little Sven over here. Why not?
Well, he had Alice K. Wells. He had Lucy McGinnis.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I'm suggesting anything about the honor of those ladies.
Mm-hmm.
So that was Flying Saucers Farewell. It's a lot of esoteric stuff. And in fact, the reason it was a farewell, he said, was because he was getting out of the flying saucer game, because the Space Brothers now just wanted him to focus on getting their message out there. He'd told people enough about the nuts and bolts of the aliens. Now it's
enough with the saucers.
Now it's time to get the message out and really focus on that philosophy.
Sure. Convenient.
Yeah. So he's done with flying saucers.
Or is he?
Also in 1961, he announced to his followers that, hey, the Space Brothers took me to Venus.
Wow, what a finale.
Yeah, and he met his wife there, so that was great.
His dead wife?
Oh, yes, she had died in 1954, but now she was reincarnated. Because reincarnation is real, just like in Theosophy, but it turns out you are reincarnated, if you're very special, on Venus.
So his wife, who had seemingly no interest in his work with the extraterrestrials and such.
I think that's 100% fair, yes.
Died and was reincarnated as a Venusian extraterrestrial.
Yeah, I think that's about the size of it.
It's kind of ironic.
His followers kind of started raising eyebrows at this one.
Okay, we're fine with the flying saucer. We're fine with Orthon, but your wife? Really?
What's even worse is I think he took that trip astrally. So he then had to reveal to them that actually I was in a hotel room the whole time.
Yeah, with Sven and Hans and Ilmuth and all of his bevy of blondes.
I believe it was Ilmuth said that one time she hung around. She snuck into his bedroom after he said he was waiting for one of the Space Brothers. And then she stuck around and he just muttered to himself for 3 hours.
That's even sadder than saying it's Space Brothers and just banging some blonde guy.
I know. That's when she left.
Well, she waited for 3 hours, then she was like, you know what? Now it's a little weird.
I think he might be crazy.
So she left his company as well.
Yes. That was the last straw for her, yeah.
Oh, awkward.
But at this point, Lucy McGinnis and Carol Honey and Alice Wells, all of his OGs are still with him.
The Williamsons?
The Williamsons, I think, are out right around this time.
Well, they saw what they wanted to see, and now they're done.
Yeah. If the Venus thing, if the astral projecting to Venus wasn't the last straw for the Williamsons, it might have been in 1962 when Adamski announced that he was going to attend an interplanetary conference on Saturn.
Sure. I mean, he did plenty of planetary conferences on Earth. Why not go to Saturn and do one?
So he went on this trip on March 26th, 1962.
Astrally?
No.
Oh.
I'll tell you all about it. And in fact, he told his followers all about it. And then the next afternoon, he told some other followers about it. And some of the followers who were at both, I think Carol and Lucy were both at both of those things, and they asked him, hey, Professor, some of the things you said weren't the same as the things you said yesterday about the trip. It didn't say what, but they noticed some inconsistencies. And at that point, right around then, George decided that he couldn't tell that story anymore because the information was confidential. So what instead he was going to do
This is why you can't have nice things.
Yeah, so instead he was just going to print up 2 informational booklets to tell people about it. And they were going to be made available to the public for a small fee.
And that way the story won't change.
And here's the thing, it's confidential information, right? You have to be worthy to receive it.
For the low, low price of $10.50.
Well, by purchasing it, Carrie, you prove that you believe yourself worthy. And isn't that what really matters?
Sure.
Because if you believe it, the cosmic oneness believes it.
Yeah, I think that's the central idea of all of George's thoughts and feelings.
So he traveled in a massive ship this time that he said was invisible and controlled by the pilot's thoughts that instantly teleports to its destination.
So why do you even need a ship?
Because he did physically go
Why is there a pilot?
Because there's someone has to run the ship. Someone has to do the thoughts.
Sure. Whatever.
So we went to Saturn. There were other Earthlings there, famous ones who he recognized.
Like?
Oh, he can't say. It's a secret.
I want to know who else was there, Sean.
Well, there's more important things, Carrie, because they were there to discuss how the sun is drifting out of orbit.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of the wisest men in the universe were there to talk about what to do. And they decided finally, after a long discussion, that if things got really bad, they would just evacuate all the planets and get into deep space. And then they turned to the Earthlings.
That's a problem for tomorrow.
And then they turned to the Earthlings who were here. And they said, hey, Earthlings, this means you guys should really focus less on war and more on, like, building spaceships. That would be a better use of your resources.
I mean, to be honest, that's not wrong.
Now, they're throwing a lot at him, though. And so thankfully, Adamski has a helmet that they put on him as he comes in that helps him memorize everything that's said.
Sure.
And he was able to fully remember it all when he wrote the book, not when he did the verbal accounts, of course.
Clearly not.
In these pamphlets, in Saturn Trip 1 and 2, the creatively named pamphlets about his Saturn trip.
It was a trip, all right.
So he gives all those are the events. He also just goes off on a tirade for a little while about how his detractors are all saying the same things about him, even though they live thousands of miles apart on the globe. And therefore, they're obviously being coordinated by some central group. Could it perhaps be the Silence Group, he asks?
Yeah, a bunch of people saying, this guy's crazy is definitely a coordinated conspiracy.
For some reason, he also throws in another account of the ancient history of the Earth that directly contradicts what was written inside the spaceships.
Well, he has more information now, Sean.
Suffice it to say that things are getting
weird.
Things are getting a little weird.
Out of hand.
And he's losing people.
And his mind.
Yeah, the Williamsons are out. I think McGinnis might have been out after that one.
Oh.
And then also in 1962, I don't know if he was getting desperate. I don't think we can read that into George Adamski, because we're not him, right?
Mm-hmm.
All I can tell you is what he did in 1962.
And what's that?
Several of his co-workers received a message in the mail.
His co-workers...
Oh, he never called these people followers.
Oh, I see.
They were his
peers.
Co-workers, always. So several co-workers get a message in the mail with strange symbols on them.
Like the sneaker symbols?
Exactly like the symbols on Orthon's shoes. Although in this case, helpfully, the translation's just written right underneath in English.
Oh, nice. Thank you, Orthon.
Yeah. And the message says, "You do good work. G. Adamski is the only one on Earth, that we support."
Postmark Venus.
And It's funny, I have the postmark here. It sounds like it's from the Space Brothers, presumably, right?
Of course.
Yeah, and this was postmarked from P.O. Box 885 in Glendale.
Ooh. Well, they have a P.O. box, Sean.
About 112 miles from Palomar. Which doesn't tell you anything, really, but it was also... if you look, it looks a lot like Adamski's handwriting. So that's tough. Also in 1962, Adamski bought a bunch of business cards. A box of business cards to hand out. And I think you'll like these, Carrie.
I love a nice business card.
So it says, "Space people need contacts. Can you qualify?"
Mm-hmm.
In an almost broken English similar to a Wish product description.
Uh-huh.
Right. And so Adamski bought these to hand out at conventions so he could get... He's losing followers, right? He needs to pick up some more.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, "Write for free particulars." Carrie, could you read the address that you're supposed to check in for?
Box 885, Glendale, California. Doesn't look good. It doesn't even make sense. People getting this at conventions like, what? What does this even mean?
Yeah, what do I do with the space people
Thanks.
Space people need contacts. Can you qualify?
I don't know.
Do I want to? So I don't know.
It's pretty rough.
Those actions are strange and frankly hard to account for. I don't know why. I don't know why he did that or what he was thinking. It seems like real desperation.
Mm-hmm.
In 1963, he took one last world tour, doing speaking engagements. He still has fans all over the world, George Adamski.
Mm-hmm.
So he did one last little world tour and visited the Vatican. He had been saying his whole life that his biggest dream was to get a meeting with the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
And here he was in the Vatican, and he was standing with a few of his friends. And he said to them, "Oh, there's my man right over there." And he pointed in a direction. And then he kind of melted into the crowd, they said.
Mm-hmm.
But he was walking over towards a doorway. And then he was gone. And then he comes back. And he says, "I've seen him. I've seen the Pope." I'm super excited. They go to a restaurant. He doesn't speak at all. They go back to their hotel room. The next morning, he's much more talkative. And he produces a small plastic case with a golden medal inside of it. He explains that the Pope gave him this special medal that's related to aliens somehow.
Yeah, it's the Pope alien medal, Sean. You haven't heard of that?
Right, and it's only then that he's able to explain to them that his meeting was to get a, quote, final agreement from the Pope on behalf of Orthon, because the Pope had made a principled decision not to communicate directly with the aliens. And also to give him a liquid cure Orthon had slipped him that would cure the Pope's gastric enteritis. Because the Pope was very sick at the time. This was John the 23rd, who died 3 days later.
You done goofed, Orthon.
So the cure wasn't great from Orthon. And also that medal, you can see pictures of it. His followers loved displaying it. Mm-hmm. It is all but confirmed to be a street souvenir from Italy, complete with the same plastic clamshell case it came in.
Oh, buddy. It's getting sad now.
It's tough. And this whole time, because I think he did pretty well, but I think he also lived pretty large for a while. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think the money from the books stuck around that well. I don't think Adamski was ever rich. I think he was able to live...
He wasn't desperately poor like he grew up, but...
He was able to live simply, I think, and happily, and with friends around, without working very hard.
And what else can we ask for, Sean?
For a very long time. But he was working his ass off at the end of his life. He was 74 years old in 1965. Mm-hmm. And as he was blowing out his candles, he had just given another lecture. He blew out his birthday candles that day, and there were 2 left burning on the cake. And Adamski, who had always been very superstitious, looked around at the coworkers who had gathered with him for that occasion, and he said, well, I guess I don't have much time left. And he was certain that the 2 candles meant it would only be 2 days, or 2 weeks, or 2 months until his death. And 6 days...
Who's going to tell him that we got trick candles?
And 6 days later,
Oh, well, 2 times 3, Sean.
George Adamski had a heart attack, a massive heart attack. He was taken to the hospital, and he died soon after. He was, as I said, overworked. He was also a constant smoker and drinker from the time he was a
Child.
for the time he was a cavalry soldier, presumably.
Mm-hmm.
So his body just wasn't going to come back. And all things considered, 74 was probably a fairly good run.
Yeah, not terrible for the time.
Yeah. As I said, he directed, I would say, in a big way, sort of directed the entire movement of the UFO craze in the 1950s.
Certainly with the Nordic aliens and that whole idea.
Even the saucer craft, he was the first one.
He didn't necessarily see a saucer. He saw a blimp-like object and a cigar-shaped object, but he called them flying saucers, right?
Well, the scout ship.
The scout ship that popped out of the mama ship. That was like a classic saucer shape.
Yeah, this is his most famous photo. It's the one that is the cover photo for this episode, actually. We'll also post it on the website.
Listen, all things considered, it's pretty much in focus. I mean, it's detailed. It's better than a Bigfoot picture.
Yep.
That is, of course, if he was actually taking a picture of the sky.
So this is the most famous photo, yeah. And this was 1952 when Orthon supposedly returned to bring those photograph plates back.
But did not leave the vehicle.
No, he never did. No, he just kind of dropped it out. But when Orthon returned, that photo, which again, you can see it on the website, and Carrie, you're looking at it here. What do you think of it? This is generally considered the most compelling thing Adamski ever captured.
It's cool looking.
Even at the time, skeptics were trying to figure out what it was, and claiming that it was not a flying saucer, in fact. People said lots of things like that. It was a drink bottle cooler or a lamp. German scientist Walter Johann Riedel at the time, of course, Riedel High was named for him. He said it just looked like a chicken brooder, which is a kind of a heat lamp they use in chicken coops, and that these 3 landing struts right here were light bulbs. And in fact, he claimed that he could see the GE logo on one of them, which I can't in this photo. But
he enhanced it, Sean.
Yeah, the Gil Grissom style enhance. Yeah, but that's Adamski. That's his life and legacy. But I think it's so interesting because it touches on so many things that we'll probably get into more on this podcast. Theosophy probably will come up again.
Flying saucers,
Certainly flying saucers, Nordic aliens, Scientology, cults and Scientology, because this is very cult-like as well.
Yeah, it doesn't seem as nefarious as a lot of those cults, like even, something like Heaven's Gate, which is very alien-based. Doesn't seem to have ever hurt anyone. But I don't know. It just got sadder and sadder. What do you think his deal was?
What do I think his deal was? I think he was kind of a proto L. Ron Hubbard. I think he liked getting laid.
Well, do you think he believed his own spiel, or
no?
did you...
I think the most generous I can be to George Adamski is that I think he really believed in the philosophy of the Earth Brothers that he was preaching. Moon Brothers, Space Brothers.
But he knew it wasn't of the Space Brothers.
Yes, I don't think he believed in the Space Brothers, but I think he really believed in humanity turning away from, looming tensions and world wars and thermonuclear tests and turning towards everyone working together to, work toward a brighter future. I think that's something George Adamski thought he could help humanity to work towards, and if it made him a couple of bucks and he didn't have to work too hard.
Bonus.
Yeah,
as far as philosophies go, at least that part of it, it's not terrible. Now, when you get to the whole silence group and bankers and is it anti-Semitic? That's where it gets a little problematic. But as far as, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this nuclear war stuff and just be nicer to each other and work towards like understanding the universe and stuff. Yeah, that's not a terrible thing.
Why does it always get anti-Semitic? Why?
I don't know.
Conspiracy
It's really
theorists.
not necessary.
Why does it have to get anti-Semitic?
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Don't do it.
Adamski also still has plenty of fans who will to this day defend that photograph, and they'll even do kind of back handsprings to explain away the fact that obviously no one lives on Venus, right?
You don't know that, Sean.
But they'll go, actually, if you pay attention, George only ever talked to the aliens about the planets with a number system, and so we don't even know if they knew he was talking about the same Venus.
We don't even know they were talking about planets. He was just pointing at his watch going, Mars? Saturn? They were like, yeah, bro, sure. Mars and Saturn. Okay. Venus. Yes.
Whatever you need. Yeah, he's still got his fans who will defend him. You can go to adamskifoundation.com and look at all of their evidence. They're still the page seems to have semi-frequent updates, even though it looks like it was built on Angel Fire in 1995.
Hey, the Heaven's Gate page still has updates. Still looks like it's from the 90s. So,
what is it about UFO cults?
I don't know. I think once you get in that deep, it's hard to not believe in it, you know?
Yeah. And I also have to thank Mark Hallett of both the Swedish UFO organization and Skeptic Report, who wrote a book-length, just complete rundown of all this stuff, a critical appraisal of George Adamski, which he put on the internet just for free. And it was a huge resource for me. So that was very helpful.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. I also want to thank all of the listeners, again, for being here with us.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a great time, and it's fun to just pick and choose these topics that we find fascinating. I mean, I know that you first heard about this guy from a RPG we played.
That's another important annotation. Yeah. Go find Watch the Skies by Jason Morningstar. It is a parlor LARP.
Bully Pulpit Games.
Yeah, like a role-playing game for 10 people where you don't roll dice, you just stand in a room and have a party.
Yeah, so you could listen to this episode and then be these people. You could be Alice Wells, you could be Desmond Leslie, you could be Adamski himself. And it's a lot of fun, and it has a lot of these pieces to it, like the UFO picture, and I think that there's some sort of weird business cards in it and letters and things like that.
It was for my birthday that we played it. I was Adamski, and I do definitely remember desperately trying to hold together my reputation as everything was falling apart around me. So
meanwhile, I'm the one running the game, and I have a styrofoam spray painted UFO on a stick, and I just run by with it, which is probably similar to what Adamski was pulling in real life.
Yeah, so it's all very authentic. Watch the Skies, you guys. Jason Morningstar. It's real good.
It's a lot of fun.
And we're not being paid to say this.
No, but Jason, get at us. Because we love you. We love your stuff.
Fiasco is my favorite role-playing game. Let's come back with a segment.
Okay.
It's a break.
Very appropriate for our topic at hand. It's fear of the final frontier. In a statement on October 26, 2020, NASA revealed that water has been discovered on the sunlit surface of the moon. NASA's Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy, or SOFIA, has confirmed for the first time water on the sunlit surface of the moon. This discovery indicates that water may also be distributed across the lunar surface. Quote, "We had indications that H2O, the familiar water we know, might be present on the sunlit side of the moon," said Paul Hertz, director of the Astrophysics Division in the Science Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters in Washington. "Now we know it's there. This discovery challenges our understanding of the lunar surface and raises intriguing questions about resources relevant for deep space exploration. Water is a precious commodity in space and is a necessary building block for life as we know it. So if water can survive on the harsh, airless lunar surface, where else in space may it exist?"
Great question. Where else might it exist, Carrie?
I don't know, but it's on the moon, that's for sure.
What did we just find about Venus?
There was life in certain forms, microscopic forms in its atmosphere, I believe.
All right, so what you're telling me is there are channels on the moon who couldn't have been built by an intelligence from Earth.
And life on Venus, Sean, it all comes full circle.
Well, sounds to me like George Adamski wasn't so crazy after all, was he, Carrie?
Sure. That's it for this episode of Ain't It Scary with Sean and Carrie. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Ain't It Scary, and check out our website at ain'titscary.com. And please subscribe to the show and throw us a 5-star review on iTunes. We'll be forever grateful.
We will, and we're trying to come up with just more ways you guys can interact with us, and hopefully tell us what you like, what you don't like. We'll be in touch soon.
Absolutely. But for now, see you next Tuesday.
This show created by Sean and Carrie McCabe, music by Kyle Ryan.
This has been a production of Long Boy Media.